What's up, everybody? It is the Sooners on SI podcast. I'm John Hoover. That's Carson Field and Ryan Chapman. A little under the weather today. Don't worry about it. He's going to be fine. We're all run down from a very challenging college football season, man. But you know what? Carson and I are going to try to muddle on through with the two-man show today. Hope you all like it. It's episode 278 of the Sooners on SI podcast. Today is Wednesday, January 8th. Carson, how are you?
Doing all right. Wish it was a little bit warmer. I left Colorado to come to Oklahoma, and it's still very, very chilly, a lot of wind. But besides that, loving it. Covering OU sports, been a lot of fun so far, settled into my new place. How are you, John?
We got a little slight, I don't know if you could call it a dusting of snow. We got some like snowflakes, some flurries. I don't know if they landed. The hot tub cover was covered a little bit, but I didn't ever see it in the grass. So I'm born and raised in North Pole, Alaska, man. I miss the snow, and when I see it falling in my yard, I get real excited. And then when it doesn't stick, I get kind of depressed. But did y'all get snow in Oklahoma City, Norman area?
Like flakes. It didn't really stick. It snowed one evening, but when I woke up the next morning, there was nothing on the ground.
Yeah,
I feel like that's pretty normal.
that's the worst kind of snow, the kind that doesn't stick around.
Yep.
Let's get to today's show. On today's show, we're going to dive into several things. The roster first. We're going to talk about the comings and goings from the portal to who they retained to recruiting, how recruiting's going. We're going to take a look at the defensive coordinator search, of course, and why Brent Venables is not really in any particular hurry to get this done. We're going to talk about basketball, of course. The men's and women's teams are on a heater, both of them. I think they're combined 25-3 now, basically 1 week into SEC play. So big show. Hope you're sticking around. You guys know where to find us, Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com. That's the website. You know, the Twitter feed to find us. The Twitter feed is Sooners on SI. You can also find me at John E. Hoover. Find Ryan at _Ryan Chapman. And Carson is at Carson D. Fields. Don't forget my field, singular, not plural, fields.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's important because I've been tempted to do that about 100 times. You might be the first person I've ever met whose last name is the singular Field. I've known a lot of Fields, not very many Field.
We're not rare, we're unique. That's what I like to say.
There you go. I love it. Also, don't forget my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. All right, Carson, let's get started. Let's start with roster retention, where Oklahoma has really gotten some good news. You can say portal, you can say recruiting, you can say whatever. They've gotten some good news, I think, in that they've got some guys back. Most recently, R. Mason Thomas, their best defensive end last year. He has decided he wants to play his senior year at OU. He comes back, leads the team with 9 sacks, tackles for loss. Extremely productive, brings the tomahawk when he hits a quarterback, knocks the football out. He's good at that stuff. I think he recovered a couple of fumbles this year. He had the scoop and score at LSU,
I think.
right?
Yep.
So this is their best defensive lineman, their best defensive end, best edge rusher, whatever you want to call it. This was a guy this is a victory. This is a big victory for Oklahoma.
No, it's gigantic. Our Mason Thomas, that's someone that we got to talk to after the LSU game, before the bowl game. And he just talked about how blessed he was to have played a season without injuries. And he really showed himself what he can do on this defensive line when he's not dealing with an ankle injury, any sort of injury. And he looked great this year. Obviously, kind of a ball hawk. Ball hawk, obviously a term more used for defensive backs for interceptions. But he was one for fumbles. He did a great job with that this year, got to the quarterback quickly. He really proved that he's a hard guy to stop for opposing offensive lines. And that showed in the LSU game and so many other games this year. That is gigantic. Teaming up with a portal addition that we'll talk about a little bit later, that's going to be really scary, the outside defensive line for the Sooners next year.
Yeah, and here's the thing with R. Mason. I think he had 3 sacks against Tulane. And you guys correct me if I'm wrong. I think he had one late against Houston, but he did a lot of his best work in terms of getting to the quarterback when the other team was down and the other team was desperate to throw passes, and everybody knew, including R. Mason Thomas, knew that the quarterback would be dropping back to pass. And he got, I think it was the Auburn game where he got 2 sacks late, where, Auburn's like, oh my gosh, they've taken the lead. Now we need to go down and score like right now. Start dropping back to pass, and he's there in the quarterback's face. He's batting that ball, or he almost batted that ball that got picked off. An extremely disruptive player, but Brent Venables and R. Mason himself would tell you he needs to be more consistent. He needs to produce that kind of disruption on first down in the first quarter, and not just on third down and fourth down in the fourth quarter.
No, sure, that's a fair point. I think there's so much promise seeing what he did this year compared to his past 2 years at OU, but there's
Mm-hmm.
still so much for him to learn. I think that's probably best for his future too.
Yeah,
He's someone that probably would have been graded well for the NFL, gotten a decent draft selection, but learning how to defend multiple things, not just in those late game situations against Tulane, Houston, Auburn, stuff like that. That's big for him. But I think it's a gigantic win for the Sooners more than it is for him too. The guy is a proven athlete, good frame, built like a defensive lineman, a lot of athleticism. So if you're an OU fan, you've got to love this.
for sure. Sooners also got their best safety back this week. Yeah, that's right. I said best safety. Robert Spears Jennings was better this year, I thought, than Billy Bowman. Billy Bowman, third team All SEC, had some first team All SEC preseason run, but who had the better season? I thought it was Robert Spears Jennings. He decided to come back, and I don't know what his options were. I don't know what his draft grade was. I don't know if anybody was interested in tampering with him to get him in the portal so they could bring him out. I don't know. All I know is that he came to Oklahoma. He loves OU. He plays from Broken Arrow, about 4 miles that way from my house right now. Um, has loved OU, has had opportunities to explore leaving, and every time came back, and including this time. He had the top Pro Football Focus grade. He played 600 snaps. This kid and loves to hit. I absolutely love watching him collide with somebody, a receiver over the middle, or a big tight end that thinks he's got the body on him, right? And Robert Spears Jennings cuts him down like a bale of hay. It's pretty impressive. He loves contact. He's another guy that you look at his disruptive plays, forced fumbles recovered, big hits, momentum turning hits. He's a guy too that, wow, what a boost for this defense to have somebody with that kind of playmaking ability and that kind of experience back.
John, I'm glad you said that. I mean, I've only covered 3 games in person for OU football, but so many players in this day and age of college football are scared to hit because of the penalties they might get, stuff like that. But Robert Spears Jennings does not seem like that guy. I mean, 4 forced fumbles this year. That was, I believe it was six, tied for sixth in the nation. I
Yeah.
could be wrong on that, but it was definitely up there. One of the best players as far as getting the ball loose. And that doesn't include all the times that he made a big hit on a reception that the ball got jarred loose. It was an incompletion, huge play for the defense. And that's really impressive to see. It's gigantic that he's coming back. Secondary is an area that they might be looking for some more reinforcements. And Spears Jennings coming back, that's so big. They're losing Billy Bowman Jr., obviously, like you said, Woody Washington. And the pass defense, that's an area that wasn't necessarily the best this past year. But him coming back, he's a huge playmaker in that part of the defense. Getting him back is gigantic.
Yeah, and they when they come back, they join guys like Dominic Williams, who had already decided and announced he was coming back. He's their best defensive lineman. So you've got your best safety, your best defensive end, your best defensive tackle, all coming back. We already knew about Kip Lewis. He announced in December before the bowl game that he was coming back. Kip Lewis, not necessarily your best linebacker. That goes to Danny Stutzman, obviously,
Right.
consensus All-American, and you're going to miss him. But Kip Lewis is a guy that's on that next rung, that's kind of fitting up into that role of the tackles leader, productivity leader, consistency leader, and just leadership leader. That's where Kip
Yeah.
Lewis is coming from as well. So um, these are guys that when you think about productivity, you think about experience, you think about guys who have been now through an entire season of SEC play. Those 4 dudes coming back, huge for Brent Venables in this defense.
Oh, it's gigantic. Adding Dominic Williams back with what they have on the ends, that's going to be a stout defensive line, one of the best in the SEC. Which it's funny you look at SEC defensive lines. There are so many. Probably the 10th best defensive line in the SEC is the 20th best in the country. That's the type of dudes they get in the SEC.
Yep.
They're all stout, but this is going to be up there for one of the best in the SEC, I believe. Dominic Williams, he has the size, He's pretty quick for a guy that plays defensive tackle. So that's a big get. Pairing him with R. Mason Thomas, who showed a lot of growth. Marvin Jones Jr., I think we're going to talk a little bit more about him in a little bit, but that's gigantic. Getting a better pass rush, better run defense for that matter, too. Paired with some returners at linebacker, cornerback, safety. It's impressive what they've been able to keep in maybe absence of some of those big splashes, other than John Mateer, that they could have made in the portal.
Yeah, and I think when I say best defensive tackle, best defensive lineman, I think Dominic Williams is better probably draft grade than Grayson Halton. But Grayson Halton made plays, especially earlier in the
Yeah,
season. If you were to rank the 10 best, most important plays of the Oklahoma defense all season, I think he would have two of them.
yeah.
He's a fantastic player. He's really grown into that role as well. So all apologies to Grayson Halton, but yeah, Dominic Williams coming back is huge. And, Grayson Halton coming back, that's a guy again, he was in the rotation this year. He was the second guy at, I think, a little bit of tackle, a little bit of three technique, but also I think he might have played some nose. Anyway, we're getting too deep into the weeds for our football knowledge. You look real quick at the defensive ends. You lost Downs, you lost Trace Ford, and you lost Caden Woolard to graduation. You're adding as freshman next year, CJ Nixon, local kid, Alex Shield Knight, local kid. So that's pretty good. Those are both, athletically speaking, both extremely raw, but at the same time, guys who are extremely, extremely well thought of, athletic, explosive, dynamic. So that's good for the future. We're talking more about 2025. So in terms of defensive ends here, you mentioned him, Marvin Jones Jr. Oklahoma in the transfer portal finally got to the defense. They've been supplementing offensive guys. They got 12 offensive guys, 0 defensive guys. Now they've got some defensive guys finally coming in. And we'll start with Marvin Jones.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big get. You look at Florida State's year this year, it was not great. This team really struggled, but Florida State is one of those, I don't know if you want to call them a blue blood, but if they're not, they're right up there. They're close. They're very close. They're a program that regardless of bad seasons they have, they're going to get dudes. They're going to get stud athletes, stud players, and Marvin Jones Jr., from everything I've heard, is one of those. A lot of speed, a lot of athleticism, very strong guy. Pairing that with R. Mason Thomas, who, like we said, made leaps this past season, I think that's very impressive. They needed to shore up the defense a little bit. Obviously, so much has been made of the offense with Ben Arbuckle coming in, John Mateer coming in, getting some new receivers. Getting that first defensive transfer is gigantic, especially from a program like Florida State, where he was a big player. He put up good stats there, did some impressive things for the Seminoles, even though they were what, 2-10, 3-9 this year.
2-10.
It's a rough year. But he's a good player. He definitely has so much potential to be a force in this OU defense.
Yeah, 2-10. Not what you want out of your,
No.
in terms of winning championship DNA, knowing how to win, knowing how to make plays that equate to victory. I mean, not necessarily what you want. It's not his fault they went 2-10. They had the worst season basically almost on record. I mean, you go back pre-Bobby Bowden, they weren't this bad. But Marvin Jones, a former 5-star recruit, he started at Georgia, or he began, I should say, at Georgia. He didn't really do much, played 2 seasons at Georgia, went to Florida State this year, but he was a 5-star kid for a reason. And one of those reasons is his dad is Marvin Jones Sr. Marvin Jones Sr. She's won the Butkus Award, won the Nagurski Trophy at Florida State, was a New York Jet for 11 years, I think, made some all-pro teams. Dude's unbelievable. Oh, currently, by the way, he's a professional football coach. He coaches the Tulsa Oilers, I believe it is, here in my hometown. He is the head coach and defensive coordinator. Had him on my radio show a couple of years ago when he came to town. It was pretty cool to get to talk to Marvin Jones. But his son was being recruited at that time, and he was strongly feeling like OU was going to be one of his top schools, and it was one of his top schools. But Marvin Jones, again, is a guy that he comes with a lot of promise and a lot of potential. He's big, he's strong, he's long, he's athletic, he's explosive. He's not very physical when you look at him. He catches a lot of blocks, and maybe that's something that him and R. Mason can get to put their heads together on and say, okay, here's some techniques that I've learned. Here's some techniques that I've learned, because you've got one guy that looks like a first round draft pick, and you've got another guy that, when the game's on the line, plays like a first round draft pick. Maybe they can get together and put some things together on that. Because let's look real quick, Carson, at the Oklahoma Edge team. Okay, you got R. Mason, you got Marvin Jones, you got another 5-star in PJ Adebawore. You got Danny Okoye from right here in Tulsa. Danny Okoye was phenomenal in high school. I covered a couple of his games. Kid did whatever he wanted. You got Nigel Smith, okay, from Melissa, Texas. He didn't play much this year, if at all. I don't know if he did. I don't think he played. But he's a guy, again, 4-star, prospect ranking. He's a guy that a lot of people who've seen him play, including me, loved what he did. You've got Taylor Wine in a backup role this year. You've got Wyatt Gilmore in a backup role this year. You're too deep on the defensive line is pretty phenomenal for an SEC team. R. Mason Thomas and PJ on one side, probably Marvin Jones Jr. and Danny Okoye on the other side. And then inside, we've talked about it. You got Dominic, you got Grayson Halton, you got Jaden Jackson, and probably more than likely David Stone will be in that rotation, 5-star. So you've got, just looking at it, you got 3 5-stars in your too deep on the defensive line. Guys, that is how you win football games in the SEC.
Yep. You've got to love that, because, I mean, even if, say, Marvin Jones, maybe there is a reason that he's transferred 3 times now. He's at his 3rd school now. There are so many guys that they're the same level of athleticism, speed, size. I mean, being that highly touted, they might be able to fill that spot just as well. But I mean, there's so much promise with a guy like Marvin Jones Jr. It takes a lot to get an offer from Georgia and then a transfer offer from Florida State. That's huge. But the depth, that's something you've just got to love. That people say stars don't matter. Stars kind of matter in the SEC. They mean a lot when it comes to size, speed, strength, athleticism, all these big things. And to compete with these gigantic offensive linemen. I know that Texas, Arkansas, teams like that, out of nowhere, just find the biggest, nastiest players they can find on their offensive lines. And to have people this skilled, this big, this quick, that's gigantic for OU.
It is absolutely gigantic. And I was going to go over a couple of numbers from Marvin. He played 25 games with Georgia in 22 and 23, mostly a backup. He was on the national championship team, but he was mostly a reserve, outside linebacker, stand-up defensive end type player. He was a backup in the rotation, sort of, in 2023. He got 12 tackles to his name. I think for his 2 years in Georgia, he had 16 tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. So that tells you he didn't get a lot of time to be on the field and get a lot of those, tackle numbers. But when he was on the field, it tells you that 5.5 tackles, the ratio of tackles for loss to tackles, 5.5 tackles for loss, 2 sacks, tells you what he's capable of, tells you how explosive he is or can be. And then last year at Florida State, 25 tackles, again, 6 tackles for loss, 4 quarterback sacks. If he can be more consistent, if he can be more physical, if he can get on the football field more consistently, I think he's got a chance to be an extremely disruptive player for Oklahoma.
Yeah, I mean, for a team as bad as Florida State was, 25 tackles being a defensive end, that's impressive. Even if you're on a good team, that's a pretty good season for a defensive end. They don't get the tackles like the linebackers do. 4 quarterback sacks, I think you said. I mean, that's a high number. It's not record breaking, it's not national leading, but it's a good number. It shows what he's capable of. Them playing a lot of good teams throughout the 2024 season. That just shows what he is capable of. I didn't realize his numbers at Georgia, obviously being more of a backup. Those are pretty solid numbers, though. That shows that when he got the opportunities, he was very capable of making big plays for the Bulldogs.
Yeah.
I feel like if you're an OU fan, you have to be excited for that. This guy, obviously a highly touted recruit, did a lot of big things, considering OU initially, goes to Georgia, goes to Florida State. This guy's very capable, and that's got to be exciting.
One more note on Marvin. He chose OU after visiting Texas.
Oh, interesting.
Okay, so he wanted to go to Texas, but he decided OU was better for him. Now, is that because his dad's 2 hours up the road in Tulsa and can come down and see him play and he can hang out with his pops? Maybe, probably a little bit. I'm sure that had something to do with it. Yeah, but hey, they beat Texas. I think he was thinking about Penn State, Ohio State, maybe as well. A couple of, guys that are in the playoff, right? Teams that are in the playoff.
Yeah.
He chose to come to Oklahoma, which was not in the playoff this year, 6-7. Another guy that is kind of like old home week. If you cover recruiting, if you cover OU recruiting, it's kind of like old home week. Kendall Daniels, number one player in the state of Oklahoma in 2022.
Yeah.
This kid out of Beggs, Oklahoma, again, about 45 miles that way from where I'm sitting. He was the number one player in the state of Oklahoma, consensus. I mean, everybody pretty much agreed on it. He was special. Big dude, wanted to play safety. Alex Grinch wanted him at Oklahoma, but he wanted him to play linebacker. He wanted to go to OU, but he wanted to play linebacker. So, sorry, he didn't want to play linebacker. He wanted to play safety. So he went to OSU, ended up being an amazingly productive player. I think he had 240 career tackles, 24 tackles for loss, 5 interceptions, handful of sacks. He's a guy that has got a ton of experience. Okay. He's got size, 6'4", 230, 235. He can play. He has played multiple positions. He can play a number of positions at OU. I don't know if he's going to play safety. I don't know if he's going to play, cheetah linebacker, which is more like a slot corner sometimes, more like an edge rusher sometimes, more like occasionally a deep safety. Who knows what he's going to do? My guess would be cheetah, where you can, even if you're Brent Venables and you have a couple of ideas on defense, right? Maybe you can create something for this guy to go be a 6'4", 235-pound pass rusher, edge rusher, kind of like could have been done with Deshaun McCulloch, but never was. I don't know if that was a thing where he wasn't good at pass rushing or they just didn't want him to do it. Seemed like a perfect fit while he was here, but they never really exploited that. But basically, Kendall Daniels will be the second KD, think about it, playing at that position. They've got Kendall Dolby, Kendall Daniels, and Sammy Omosigho playing at that position. Makes you wonder what they're going to do at that position, the cheetah position for sure.
Yeah, it's definitely deep. I mean, you mentioned Sammy Omosigho. He's been a good player for this team. Kendall Dolby, same with him. But Kendall Daniels, what I love about him is how quickly he made an impact at Oklahoma State. It didn't take him long. True freshman, he was already honorable mention for all conference team. I think he was the newcomer of the year on defense. So he was great initially, and he continued to be productive his next 2 years with the Cowboys. This year, obviously, his stats kind of took a little bit of a downturn, but that's because Oklahoma State finished 3-9. They were awful this year. The defense was in shambles, and that's not to blame for one guy. That's to blame for an entire unit. Maybe he was part of the reason, but his numbers were still pretty decent this year. His athleticism's proven. His interception ability, that is proven too. There's a lot to like about this pickup, and probably a little bit of a smirk on OU fans' faces, not playing OSU anymore and getting one of their better defenders.
Yeah, for sure. It actually looks fairly certain at this point. It's not a done deal. We're recording this podcast on Wednesday afternoon, so who knows when this will actually come down the pike, right? But it's not official yet, but it's starting to look fairly certain that OU is going to add another OSU linebacker. When you look at Jeff Robertson, senior linebacker for the Cowboys from Choctaw, Oklahoma. So they lost Jordan Mukes, Jordan Mukes never played from Choctaw, and he went and hit the transfer portal, and he's playing at a lower level right now. They brought in a quarterback, a walk-on quarterback from Choctaw, Steele Wazzle, last year. He's hit the transfer portal. So now they're going to try for Choctaw again. This time it's Jeff Robertson. Choctaw's got a really good program. Coach there does an unbelievable job. But when you look at his statistics, he's a guy that last year kind of broke out. 2024 broke out. 58 tackles this season, 8.5 tackles for loss, 3 sacks, 7 quarterback hurries. So they kind of turned him loose a little bit. I don't know if linebacker is like a major position of need for OU, even though they lost their best player, Danny Stutzman. So maybe he fills in a little bit of those shoes. I'm not saying he's going to start. I think he's going to be. I think he's going to open up behind those guys that are already there, guys like Kobe McKenzie and so on and so forth. I think he's going to be more of a depth guy. He's going to play a ton on special teams. When he played in 2023, he'd gotten 14 games. All of them he played special teams, was a key player there. He missed 22 with an injury, but he got 21. In 2021, he got into 12 games on special teams as well. And when he was a true freshman, all the way back in 2020, they put him on special teams there as well. So you're talking about a guy who knows his way around the special teams unit. His big brother, you guys might recall, former Sooner offensive lineman Logan Robertson. Yeah, Big Log, they called him. My son actually trained football-wise. He was in junior high at the time, just starting, I think, ninth grade high school. Trained with the guy, you'll remember this name, the guy who trained Logan Robertson, also trained my son. They sometimes trained side by side. They weren't doing the same things, but they sometimes trained side by side. J.D. Runnels was their trainer. He was the fullback back on those early 2000 teams. So yeah, Logan Robertson was a Sooner that wanted to eventually become a household name. His dad, I think, played at UCO, but didn't work out. He didn't land. He ended up at Oklahoma, but he wound up transferring and playing somewhere else. But the thing about it, Carson, and I look for your input here for sure. We've seen all the jokes this week about Oklahoma's AAA franchise up in Stillwater, right? they're calling guys up, right, to go to the SEC. They're calling guys up to the big leagues. How do you feel though about getting two defensive guys from a defense that ranked 132nd in the nation out of 133 teams and went 0-9 in conference play for the first time in like almost 40 years?
That's an interesting question. Granted, they played some really good offenses this past year, but still, that is alarming. Kendall Daniels, though, I like what he did in those teams that were so proven for Oklahoma State. Made the Big 12 championship game, good before that. This year, I mean, for as long as I've been watching football, you can count on Oklahoma State at least being serviceable on defense.
Yeah,
That just didn't happen this year, and I don't think that was Kendall Daniels' fault at
right.
all. Jeff Robertson, I don't know as much about him, but those stats are pretty impressive that you told me that many tackles for loss, that many sacks. Sounds like he was one of the better players on this unit this year. But also, like podcast listeners probably know, I'm an Arizona State alum. They couldn't contain anything. Run game, pass game against the Sun Devils this year. It was a little bit tough to watch that game because they just didn't have an answer. But I feel like that might be more, it's an 11-man sport versus a 1 or 2-man sport.
Yeah,
Maybe it's some coaching issues. I know there's been a lot of turmoil with the whole Mike Gundy thing. So I don't know if it's to blame on those two guys. I think depth, you look at linebacker, that's another thing I look at. There are so many guys, whether that's the Cheetah, the linebacker position that already has Kobe McKenzie, Kip Lewis, and then you look at Cheetah with two different Kendalls on it, and Sammy Omasigo. Adding a guy like Jeff Robertson, I don't think that hurts. Even if he's a depth guy, a backup, I think that's a good backup to have, assuming he does play that role. So I don't think it's overly alarming. Just kind of looking at his tape, I'm sure the Oklahoma coaches have done their due diligence on seeing what he brings. Did his numbers come in garbage time, stuff like that. So just doing their due diligence. I feel like the Oklahoma coaches probably did that.
for sure. And I would support what you're saying there about their due diligence for sure. And these guys are good players. There's no doubt. I'm not knocking those players for what OSU did defensively. I'm not knocking them for OSU's record. Brian Nardo, the defensive coordinator, was a disaster of a hire, which, we've seen closer to home, right? A disaster of a hire that needed to be fired and eventually was. They brought in Todd Grantham as their defensive coordinator, a guy that's very experienced, a guy that's very proven. But the simple fact that two local kids who cut their teeth at OSU, one was heavily recruited by OU, one was probably not so heavily recruited. They're both going to transfer to Oklahoma, presumably finish their career at Oklahoma. I think that's telling. And I'm not trying to inflame anything here. I'm just saying the fact that OSU is churning out decent players, good players on their offense and their defense. And some of them sometimes, I mean, look at Trace Ford. Trace Ford had an injury situation. He kind of ran. He felt like he ran his course at Oklahoma State, and he wanted to test the waters at Oklahoma. 2 years he did that. He was a very good player for the Sooners, especially this year when his knee was 100%. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what those guys can do. Sooners are obviously not done in the portal. They're going to bring in, I think they're up to 14 now is the number. So they've 26 guys left, including the walk-ons and folks like that. 14 guys have come in, and that also includes a walk-on or two here or there. But they're looking for help at a couple more positions. Connor, I'm sitting here looking at this. Ethan O'Connor would be one of those positions. Carson, you wrote the story I think yesterday about the transfer portal positions of need that Oklahoma still faces. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I mean, secondary, that's a big position that sticks out to me. Cornerback, maybe most of all, they have some good players returning, but they need a little bit of reinforcement. Maybe a guy to back up the safeties, this really good safety group that they have. Pass defense, I mean, you saw that in the last game of the year against LSU. Garrett Nussmeier, even getting hurt in that game, had a legacy game. He looked phenomenal, and OU couldn't do a whole lot to stop it. So I think that's a big position of need. And then kind of going back to what we just talked about, linebacker too. Not that they need another starter, but just some more depth guys. And maybe Jeff Robertson's the answer there. But getting one more guy, I think that's one of the better SEC linebacker groups in the conference. So getting one more would help there. I like what they've done offensively, running back so deep, so many guys coming back. Quarterback, they have John Mateer, Michael Hawkins Jr., and they also picked up a quarterback, I think, from Western Carolina, too. Got some new receivers, Josiah Martin from Cal lately. That's a big pickup for the Sooners. So I like what they've done offensively. It's more defensively. That's what this team, since Brent Venables took over, has kind of made its identity. I think shoring up that with getting a quarterback like Mateer, some new receivers, I think that's the recipe for success for OU.
Yeah, Mateer and the receivers are obviously going to get all the attention, but they are looking for. They're trying to get their hands around a couple more guys at a couple more positions, like you said. One of those that has got them, or at least has tweeted out, put on social at some point that he's very interested in OU is a dude from Michigan, defensive tackle from Michigan, Owen Wafel. He is looking at Rutgers. He's looking at Penn State. He's looking at Syracuse. But one of his high school teammates was Logan Howland, offensive lineman, and he's thinking about OU. So that's pretty cool. One spot the Sooners did miss at. I don't know if you'd call it a miss or they just. I guess you'd have to call it a miss because they wanted to bring him in. Ethan O'Connor, the big cornerback out of Washington State, he ended up going to Miami, where Miami is the NIL, shall we say, at Miami is large. And I think Ethan O'Connor on this particular team in 2025 we're talking about would have been kind of a welcome piece. Like you would absolutely take him. He's no doubt 100% a take. But yeah. I think their goal for him would be essentially that he comes in and competes for the job, kind of like Des Malone did last year from San Diego State. But they're not going to award it to him. They're not going to say, yes, you're definitely the starter. You're signing him more as an insurance policy for Gentry Williams. Gentry Williams is a fantastic corner, might be the fastest player on the team now. But that shoulder's a problem. That shoulder is not good. So losing Ethan O'Connor to Miami is not huge unless somebody gets hurt. And if you look at the cornerback rotation right now, it's three guys. It's Gentry, if his shoulder's good. It's Eli Bowen, and it's Jacoby Johnson. The backups are Devon Jordan and Jeremiah Newcomb, who were freshmen this year, who hardly played. And then their backups are Malik Hawkins and Cortland Guillory, two guys who in high school right now as prospects, fantastic prospects. But you look at it and you say, yeah, but how likely is it that a true freshman is going to come in and be able to, yeah, Eli Bowen just did it. So if Eli Bowen was the best corner on the team this year as a true freshman, who's to say that Malik Hawkins or Cortland Guillory can't be the best corner on the team next year as a true freshman?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think they could have, like you said, shored up that position just a little bit, get one more guy, even if it's a backup. But I do like their class. When I look at their 2025 recruiting class, what they've already signed, I do like their defensive backs and how they've really attacked that position. Malik Hawkins, obviously Michael Hawkins Jr.'s brother. That's a cool family connection. He was a great high school player. Cortland Guillory, he's very proven at a very high level of high school football. Not the same as the SEC, sure, but you've got to think that those guys are capable enough if they were thrust into valuable playing time that they'd make something happen.
Yeah, let's dive into recruiting a little bit. Now, the latest recruiting news is not good for Oklahoma. I've heard it being said that it's not a big deal, it's not a story, it's a nothing burger. That's fine, and I'm okay with that because we're talking about a kid in the 2027 class who just finished his sophomore year of high school. So they got a commitment from him when he was a freshman, Zane Rowe, 2027 defensive end from Denton Guyer. Dude is 6'5", at least 225. I've seen 240. I think he has listed himself at somewhere around close to 250. Sophomore in high school. Did you look like, were you 6'5", 250 as a sophomore in high school? I know I was, and I was about 5'10", 150.
I was about 5'9" and 120 as a sophomore in high school. I didn't hit my growth spurt until late, but no, that's gigantic. Holy cow!
Yeah, he's a heck of a player, extremely advanced, very mature. I've interviewed him a couple of times. Realistically, what chance did OU have in keeping him as a commit, as a pledge, right, for 3 years? Probably not very high. He just kind of got the recruiting process started. He just kind of got rolling on the recruiting process. Immediately fell in love with OU. Told his dad, like right there, I want to commit to OU. This was at the spring game last year. I want to commit to OU. So that was like his dad was like, "What? I thought we were going to take more visits. I thought we were going to Texas. I thought we were going to Nebraska." And he's like, "I want to go to OU." Now he's decommitted, and the reason is I had some conversations with him over the last few days. He said that OU is absolutely still on his list, absolutely still a possibility that he goes to OU. I said, "Why OU? What if you had to decommit, but you still thinking about it? What stands out?" And he said the family aspect still stands out about OU. The coaches, Coach Bates, Coach Chavis, Coach Venables, all those guys, extremely extremely family oriented. He said the decommit. I thought this was interesting. There's no bad blood. There's no like hurt feelings. He said the decommit was part and parcel of Venables' policy, unofficial policy, that if you're committed, you don't take other visits. If you're taking other visits, then you're not committed, right? That's Brent's kind of thing.
Sure.
So he looked at it and he said, okay, coach is right. I want to take these other visits now that I'm, had an All-American high school freshman season and an amazing sophomore season. I want to take some more visits. And he's got some visits coming up. I'll tell you about those. But he said the decommitment was, quote, a respectful way to visit other schools, unquote. Now, how cool is that? You got a kid that's a sophomore in high school that's got his priorities in line in terms of, I want to follow what this coach says. So but I also want to take these commits or these visits. So rather than make him mad, rather than cause confusion, I'm just going to decommit, take all these visits, and keep OU on my list. I love that about this kid.
No, I like that a lot too. I feel like people so many times commit early, and I mean that's the case with
Yep.
Rowe in this case. But decommitting that shows kind of that he wants to follow these rules. Maybe he will find somewhere that's a better fit for him than OU. But he very much that makes it clear that he wants to follow. Maybe OU still is his dream school. Maybe it is closer to home, stuff like that. That very much shows that he's buying into this. He has to do the things that all recruits have to do their due diligence, make sure that OU is the right fit for him. Maybe it's somewhere else. But I do like that about I feel like most recruits, I mean, they're high school kids. They're gonna make dumb decisions and they're gonna do things, they're gonna be committed to OU while taking other visits. And Venables obviously has kind of let that be known that that doesn't fly in his program. But him not ruling out OU and wanting to take those other visits, I don't think that's disastrous for OU in any means.
Yeah. The thing, the way this, okay, so if this was 2019, right? He commits to OU as a freshman. He might stay committed for 2 years. He might stay committed for 3 years. Who knows? But it's 2024, and we're talking about NIL, and I'm making up these numbers from the bottom of my brain, right, which doesn't work very well. So I'm just going to throw some round figures at you guys. Let's say this high school freshman goes on a visit to Oklahoma, right, and they say, "Yeah, man, we'll get you this, and we'll do that, and you probably be this, and by the way, your NIL package is probably going to be around $100,000." Kid goes ching 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 ching, the little dollar signs rolling in his eyes. Maybe he heard that. I'm not saying that's what they offered him. I'm not saying that's what he wanted. I'm just throwing a scenario out there for you guys to think about. They say, we'll offer you X amount of money, right? And he's like, wow, Dad, I'm going to commit to OU. That's incredible. And then he starts talking to other coaches. Other coaches start calling him, and SMU comes along, or Texas comes along, or A&M comes along and says, well, if you come here, we're going to pay you $3 million.
Yep.
And all of a sudden you're like, whoa, maybe I should decommit. I'm just saying that's the way NIL has changed how recruits look at schools, and it's changed how schools look at recruits. So he said that Brent Venables and Chavis, their feelings haven't changed. He told me that they're still going to recruit him hard. Okay, so they're going after him. They're not giving up just because he decommitted. So that's cool. He said there's nothing but love was the quote he gave me between himself and OU. The interest that he has in other schools is at SMU, Texas, Texas A&M, Georgia, Miami, and Florida State, where his quarterback, Kevin Sperry, previously committed to OU, flipped to Florida State. So now Kevin Sperry is recruiting him hard, I would think, to FSU. He told me he's got a visit coming to Texas A&M on January 18th, and he definitely said, I am not reclassifying to the class of 2026, although coaches have brought it up to him. Coaches have mentioned it. He's that advanced where I think he could – there's guys that can do it, and then there's guys that we think can do it. I thought Devon Mitchell was one of those guys, the tight end, that we thought could do it. Apparently he didn't have the full arsenal when he began his what should have been his high school senior year at OU. He was a freshman. This is one of those kids that you look at him physically and you're like, yep, he could do it. That one right there, he could do it. But he has no interest in doing that. He's not going to reclassify. He's going to stay 2027. Here's the deal. He was the only 2027 in the class. There's plenty of time, right? Still 2 years down the road, but it hurts. It hurts to have your only guy in that class say, I'm going to look around. Massive potential. And when you're the first guy, you start the recruitment of other kids, other prospects. So that's the part, Carson, I would think is the hard part. If there's a tough part for OU, they're going to have to go back to the kind of drawing board to start recruiting him and listen to what he's got to say about these other schools.
Yeah, no, totally. OU has a good NIL valuation. It definitely can offer some money, but it's not going to compete with the oil money at A&M, Texas, SMU, the donor money they have there. It's ridiculous. Georgia, Florida State, there are schools that will outbid Oklahoma for players.
Yep.
But also, like I said, you don't have to look at this as disaster for OU. It's one player that they're, quote, losing, but he's not officially out on OU at this point. He very well in a couple of years may decide, hey, the Sooners are the right fit for me. I'm going to go there, close to home. I like it here. We'll see how that goes. But you just look at this, and there's a lot to be done before the 2027 signing day. So it's not the one thing that Sooner fans should be worrying about. I think there's more to worry about in the very near future than there is the 2027 class, because God knows what can happen. There could be coaching changes, more transfers on this team.
Yep.
That's just the world of football that we live in these days.
And you got to believe that that's what people are telling him, SMU or whatever. Hey, bro, we just went to the playoff. What? Oh, you went 6-7. They're going to fire him. You're going to have to be committed to a coach that's not even there in 2020. There's all that stuff. Texas. Hey, we're in the playoff. We're still playing. If you commit to OU, he ain't going to be there because they're going to fire him, because everybody's saying they're going to fire him. So that negative recruiting stuff absolutely is going on. You're right. They need to focus more on the 2026 class, maybe. Yep. Maybe one or two more in 2025 with National Signing Day Part 2 coming up. I don't know. They're probably done with 25, but 26, they've got 3 guys committed. Offensive lineman Will Conroy out of Bradenton, Florida, IMG. Quarterback Jaden O'Neal, obviously out of Harbor City, California. He's one to watch for sure. And then the tight end out of Frisco, Texas, Ryder Mix. Carson, it's All America Week in the high school bowl. How do we say that? High school All America Bowl Week. I guess there's all kinds of games going on down in Orlando, which is a fantastic bowl to cover. I've covered that one before. It was amazing. It's where I met Jackson Arnold and got to know him a little bit and his family and all those guys. They had 7 high school All-Americans in that game. OU did. 7 dudes from that game signed with OU. So that was incredible. I think they've signed 14 from that class, and there's not very many of them left, high school All-Americans. Anyway, we're on to 2026. So, well, actually, we're still stepping in 2025 because this is the 25 class I'm talking about. Michael Fasusi was the MVP by On3. On3 named him the MVP of the Under Armour Bowl in Orlando. And then Ryan Foje, the other offensive lineman, 4-star guy, absolutely killing it, was named one of the top performers on day one at the Navy All-American Bowl in San Antonio. So 2 different games, 2 different players, maybe bookend positions. I don't want to say the same position because you're talking about 2 left tackles, but maybe bookend offensive tackles that are absolutely crushing it at the high school All-America competition.
Yeah, that's got to be exciting. I know Fasusi, for example, that's the highest rated prospect, at least by 247 Sports.
Yep.
He had a lot of questions. Is he going to commit to Texas, A&M, somewhere that's not OU? People thought he might flip on that early signing day. He didn't, and that was a huge sigh of relief for Sooner fans. And from what we've seen at this bowl game, what people have rated him, he's going to be a dang good player for OU football for a long time. Ryan Foje, I mean, apparently he's doing as well. He was a very highly touted prospect too, not necessarily as much as Fasusi, but getting that kind of nod, that shows how good he can and maybe will be for OU. If possibly they're lined up on different tackles, maybe even 2 years down the road, that's going to be scary.
Yeah, Fasusi was so locked in on OU. He didn't even announce OU. Everybody showed up to his announcement and he had all the OU stuff out and was like, where is the Texas hat? Where's the A&M hat? He ain't playing that game. He showed up and all his stuff was already said OU. And it was like, okay, he's in. That's what you want if you're Brent Venables and those guys, which is all great. But here's the question. We're talking 2025 offensive linemen, class of 2025 freshmen. Can 2 freshman offensive linemen help Brent Venables keep his job? Or if OU underachieves again, are they going to be helping the next coach?
Well, that's a good question. I think obviously their talent's very proven. What they bring, their frame, their athleticism, that stuff. You're not that good of a recruit if you're not that proven as an athlete.
Yeah.
But immediate impact, that's harder to say. And if it doesn't work out, if they can't make that impact for Brent Venables this year, it could be for a different coach or it could be somewhere else. I mean, that's the era that we live in college football. It could be for a different program that throws $2 million at them. It could be totally different.
You're probably right. So let's talk about Oklahoma's new defensive coordinator who hasn't been hired yet. Here's what I'm told. Wes Goodwin from Clemson was always going to be a non-starter. I am told that Brent talked to him about it, looked into it, even, talked to Dabo about it a little bit, but it was not Joe C's favorite candidate, shall we say. There was some discussion there. That's the way I understand it. He was just fired. Goodwin was just fired at Clemson a couple of days ago, like 3 or 4 days ago. After Clemson had the worst defense they've had since Brent's first season, which, the year before they gave up 70 to West Virginia in the bowl game. So Brent turned that around in 1 year. So Clemson has moved on. So Oklahoma now has moved on, right, from Wes Goodwin. The consensus now is that Brent's going to take his time. He's looking for a big name. I'm, again, told his top target is still competing in the playoffs. I'm like, wait a minute, which playoffs? The college football playoff or the NFL playoff? Don't know that. It might be multiple. It might be one of each. So if the right teams lose, it could be next week that we hear something. If the right teams don't lose, it could be the week after that. I don't personally think he's very strong on an NFL guy. I could be wrong, but I don't think he's locked into an NFL guy, so I don't expect it to drag all the way into February, after the Super Bowl. That's not going to happen. But one thing I do know I misspoke. One thing I don't know, but I feel strongly about, it's not going to be Jim Knowles. Okay. Take his name out your mouth. Dude's making $2.2 million and is probably going to win the national championship this year. He's not coming to Oklahoma. All right. It's not going to be Pete Kwiatkowski. Dude's making $1.8 million for the Longhorns. He's possibly in for a national championship as an assistant coach as well. He's not leaving Texas to come to Oklahoma. Again, been in the playoff 2 years in a row. He's going to leave Texas to go to a team that's 6-7. My guess is that it would not be Al Golden at Notre Dame, who got a 4-year, $9 million contract, so $2.25 million a year. That's what's been reported for him. I don't know how accurate it is because his numbers, private school, hasn't been officially reported and all that stuff. And then Tom Allen at Penn State, he's making $1.7 million, and he's in the playoff. Those guys aren't coming to Oklahoma. You're not leaving a playoff team for a club that went 6-7 where the coach is on the hot seat. So now what are you looking at? If you're in the playoff, if you got your eyes on one of those playoff teams, you're looking at a linebacker coach, or maybe a linebacker coach in the NFL playoff who wants to be a defensive coordinator in college at a big school like OU. That would be good. But I don't think Brent's going to hire like an established defensive coordinator who's not familiar with the intricacies of his defense like Zach Alley was, like Ted Roof was. And because of his job status, Carson, I think if you think about it for a second, OU might come out of this thing with basically a linebackers coach and the head coach calling defensive signals again, like he did with Ted Roof. I think that's exactly what's going to happen.
It definitely could be. I think you made a great point when you mentioned the defensive coordinators at the 4 schools remaining in the college football playoff. I think it would be very, very, very hard to pry one of them away from their schools. They're proven. They probably make more money than they would at OU. So that would be tough to do. But I mean, I will give Venables credit on this. He is a defensive mind. His defenses were so proven at Clemson that even if he hired, say, a linebackers coach, a safeties coach, whatever that might be, maybe it wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. Maybe he knows enough about running his team. Maybe he knows his personnel well enough that if he got someone to just kind of oversee it, maybe that would be the right move. I can't off the top of my head tell you any position coaches on defenses of the playoff teams remaining. But part of me thinks that wouldn't be the worst strategy.
Here's what I've picked up, and this is from Twitter, this is from Facebook comments, this is from our YouTube channel. You know, the commenters jump on the YouTube and throw their comments out there, which I encourage you to do. John Hoover Media, check that out. Get in the comments and let us know. Here's what I've picked up from the OU fan base via there's some message boards too that I've seen. They either want Brent to be the damn head coach and hire himself a defensive coordinator to take care of the defense, right? Or they want Brent to say, I'll be the defensive coordinator and just turn the offense over to Ben Arbuckle and not meddle and try to do his best head coaching impersonation, but be the defensive coordinator. I get the feeling that the fan base either wants him all the way to the top or is focusing strictly on DC. That's weird to me.
Yeah, that is a little bit odd. I know Brent Venables, he had a huge role, obviously being the coordinator at Clemson. Maybe being the head man, maybe some people don't want him to focus as much as the defense. They want to delegate that a little bit to someone else. But he is, like I said, a proven defensive mind. He got this job for a reason at OU. There are so many coordinators that are better coordinators than they are head coaches. But you look at Venables, I think that his strength's defense. If he needs to take a bigger role on this defense to make that the thing that stands out, maybe that's the right solution.
Yeah, I would say that I think I know what Joe Castiglione wants, and that's Brent Venables to be the CEO and then have a coordinator that he just turns the defense over to, have an offensive that he just turns a coordinator that he turns the offense over to. But I think what Joe really wants is to win games. And if winning games means Brent is spending 60 to 75% of his time in the defensive film room, then Coach Venables, go on down there, put off that meeting with me and the other head coaches, put off that meeting with me and the other associate athletic directors. You go spend an extra 4 hours in film if it'll help you win games. I think that's what Joe Castiglione would say. My pick? Here's my pick. Some of you are going to like it. Some of you are going to say, click and disconnect. Here's my pick. Brian Odom. Brian Odom, great linebackers coach, great man, great family. He's right below, I would say, what you would call an elite recruiter. Okay. I thought he had a great game as the defensive coordinator in the Alamo Bowl, the one with Stoops when they beat Oregon. But here's the deal. I admit I'm biased for Odom. He played at Ada High School just a few years after I did. He was a galactically better football player than I ever was or would have hoped to be. But I got to tell you, we Pontotoc County boys, we pull for each other, and I'm pulling that for him. When he worked for Alex Grinch, when he worked for Lincoln Riley, he was fantastic. Players loved him. If you think maybe I'm just blowing smoke, ask Danny Stutzman what he thinks of Brian Odom. When Grinch took the USC job to follow Lincoln Riley, his assumption, Danny's assumption was that Brian Odom was going to USC too, and he called his dad and said, I'm going to USC. Not knowing that Brian Odom wasn't coming to USC, and so he's like, oh, Brian Odom's not at USC? Well, I guess I'll stay at Oklahoma. That's how much Danny Stutzman thinks of Brian Odom. Anyway, if I'm being truthful with you guys, honestly, I'm the last guy you want giving Venables advice on who to hire because, I'll be frank, again, I was similarly biased for Seth Luttrell. I have a little history with Seth Luttrell. I said at this time last year, go back and look at the podcast, I said Seth Luttrell was the right guy for the offensive coordinator job. And just like Brent, I will admit I was wrong. He wasn't. But listen, hire Brian Odom as your linebacker coach and then make the defensive calls yourself if that's what you want to do. So anyway, we'll wrap it up with this. Here we go. With the wrap, not Jim Knowles, not Kwiatkowski, not Golden, not Tom Allen, and not Mike Stoops, and not Rex Ryan. You're welcome. I open the floor to you on the defensive.
Oh, shoot. Sorry. Yeah, I'm a little shocked that Goodwin wasn't more of a consideration. Maybe it was something with the AD. But he was. It is weird to see his trajectory as Clemson's defensive coordinator from year 1 to year 3. It got significantly worse.
Yep.
First year he was there, it was awesome. Second year, it was pretty good. This year, it was kind of a laughingstock. It wasn't the worst in the FBS. We're not going to say it was, but it wasn't great. It was a rough year for this defense that's really been good for the last decade or so. And maybe they're dodging a bullet. I know that he's familiar with Venables. I don't know how they would have split up those duties. Obviously, Venables being such a defensive mind, but seeing that the defense kind of burned down in flames under Goodwin this year in his third year as their defensive coordinator, maybe it is a blessing for this team. I don't know.
Yep. Good. Well said. Quick pitch. We're winding down our report card series where we're giving grades, assigning grades to each position group. I think we've got quarterbacks and coaches, and that's it. So out of 12, I think we've done 10 of them. If you missed any of them, just go to Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com. Click on the football tab. If it's not on the front page, click on the football tab, scroll down. They're all on there. I think you guys are going to like that series. I've had people tell me this is a terrific breakdown of the 2024 season. This is a good summary, I guess, of each position and what each guy did. We dive into their Pro Football Focus numbers, their statistics, their raw, numbers. And I think we did a pretty good job so far. I got quarterbacks next, and I think Ryan's going to finish with the coaches. I hope he doesn't get too – hope he's not too honest. Being honest in this business can get you in trouble with the person you're being honest about and sometimes the fan base. It just happens. It's the way it is. Anyway, you want to talk some basketball?
Let's do it.
All right, let's talk some basketball. Sooners lost. What? They were undefeated. How did they lose? They lost 107-79, almost 30 points at Alabama. Ugh. I watched this game, Carson. It was a blowout from the opening tip almost. They were out-rebounded 51-26. I don't think I've ever seen that before. I've seen teams doubled up, but 51-26 is like, what? So moving forward, they're 13-1 now?
13-1, yep.
Going into tonight's game with Texas A&M, home game. What's your concern level about this team's ability to freaking rebound the basketball?
If I have a concern, it's that this team is undersized for a team that competes in maybe this year the best conference in
Yeah.
college basketball. You have some good post players like your Glenn Taylors, your Sam Godwins, but they don't have this just remarkable size that you'll see at Alabama, Texas A&M, Auburn, Tennessee. They can't match up with that, and I think they kind of need to find their way around that. What I compare the Alabama game is what I compare the Michigan game to. Michigan, they struggled similarly down low, got out rebounded very greatly, got dominated in the paint, points in the paint wise, but they played so well in their backcourt. Jeremiah Fears had a hot hand that night, obviously hit the game winning 4-point play. And they really just, besides their post play, looked really good. That didn't happen against Bama. And if they can't operate when their guards are struggling against bigger players, that's going to be an issue. And Texas A&M, that's a team that they're arguably better on the glass than Alabama is. I think they're sixth in the nation in total rebounds, fifth in the nation in rebounding margin. So this team's going to get the ball. It's not just their post, it's their guards too. So Porter Moser seemed very confident that his team made good adjustments in practice. They worked very hard, did a really hearty and honest film session, but that's not a lot of time to prepare for a team like Texas A&M that is so good at rebounding.
Yeah, my wife watches every Thunder game. I try to watch as much as I can, and this year's team is really fun to watch. Just a blast how they play basketball. And of course, they won 15 in a row, but there's been two or three games during this stretch where the other team puts a couple of 7-footers on the floor, and you're just like screaming at the TV, "Get a rebound!" There's nothing you can do, and that's what Oklahoma looks like against Michigan. That's what Oklahoma looked like against Alabama. It's what they're going to look like anytime somebody wants to get big on the floor, big and tough and strong. It's not about, do you have a bunch of, 6'8" guys with hustle and heart and determination and grit and all that good stuff. It's about the size of the people you're going against. You're looking up here,
Yeah.
you're like, how am I supposed to get a rebound when that dude's, blocking out the sun? That's what Oklahoma's facing a little bit of.
No, it definitely is. And you see teams like Alabama with such athletic guards too. That makes it even tougher. They have three starters that are 6'11". And then you have guards like Mark Sears that are so quick, can jump so high, such athletic players. And it's just like, how do we defend this size but this speed too when controlling rebounds? And they don't have those guys. They don't have those guys at OU. They don't have that size. You look at guys that are 6'9", 6'8". That's a big player. That is not 6'11". That's not 7 foot. Like you said, that is a stark difference. You're not going to be able to reach as high. So there's just got to be things that Porter Moser teaches this team. I think by and large, he's done a lot of great things. Winning that Michigan game, that was a similar size disadvantage to the Alabama game. There have been a lot of positives on this season, but that's something competing in a conference that, like I said, is arguably the best in college basketball. They really have to patch up.
Yeah, again, relying on, fan feedback, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, message boards, whatever. And I don't think this is fair, but I'm seeing a lot of it's the same old stuff. It's the same old Porter. Beat up on a soft schedule in non-conference, and have to play a conference game, and you first thing you do is get blown out. People are like they're discontented after one conference game, which is interesting to me. There's a long way to go for this team, and I think they're going to finish maybe around 500 in conference play, which would be pretty good in your first year of SEC play. But I think that's unfair, that same old stuff, same old Porter stuff. I think this is a little different team. Of course, that's what we said last year, and it's what we said the year before that. I think this is a different team. I'm not 100% sure. Let's preview real quick tonight's game, Texas A&M. A lot of people are going to be listening to this tomorrow after the game, but just your thoughts on A&M. And Carson, it's getting ready to get harder. It's getting ready to get tougher when you look ahead at the schedule.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. But let's start with A&M. The Aggies are without Wade Taylor IV, who is one of the better players in college basketball. A great three-point shot, great scorer, great facilitator. He can do it all. But he is out for undisclosed reasons tonight, so that's a big loss. That said, this team is very deep. Zurich Phelps, I believe he is a Dayton transfer. He has been phenomenal for the Aggies this year. This team with Anderson Garcia, they're very deep. They can rebound, they can score, they can play defense. They can do everything. That's what Porter Moser stressed about just how versatile they are. They're a different kind of beast than Alabama. Alabama, they seem like a sure-handed Final Four team at this point. But A&M's kind of that scrappier team. You don't see necessarily the blue chip recruits, the athleticism that you see at Bama, but they do everything above average, which has made them a top 10 team at this point, which is very impressive. Um, but you look at the next stretch of games for OU. You got Georgia at Georgia on Saturday. This is a Georgia team that just beat Kentucky, a top 10 team. I don't think anybody saw Georgia being one of the better teams, and they still might not be. But that shows how good and how deep this league is this year. Texas, I mean, they're not amazing. They're one of probably the bottom half teams in the conference this year. They're not ranked. But it's a team that has a lot of talent. We talked about how much money they have in football. They also have a lot of money in basketball, so they have talent. So on a given night, if they're hot, they kept a good game against Auburn, the number 2 team in the nation last night. They can compete with you. So I don't want to say anything's a must win. We are one game into the conference season at this point, so I'm not going to say anything too dramatic. But they've got to start turning some of these into W's. But to address your initial point, I don't think it's Samuel Porter either. Beating 6 different teams from power conferences, most of whom have put together pretty good seasons. That Arizona win, that has aged great. They blew out, I forget who they played, but whoever they played in their Big 12 opener, they blew them out. They've who else was it? Michigan, they've looked really good. They beat UCLA, a really good UCLA team. So some of their wins are aging better than people expected, which in this age of analytics, net rankings, KenPom, stuff like that, that's bigger than you realize that the teams that they beat are beating other teams.
Yeah.
So as much as that Alabama loss wasn't pretty, there's a lot to like about what they've done and how that could translate later in the SEC season.
Do you know where they're at right now in the net rankings?
They were 44 last I checked.
That seems low for a team that's 13 and
Yep.
1.
It does. I agree with you.
Man. They were one of the last 3 undefeated teams in the country. There are exactly, correct me if I'm wrong, 0 undefeated teams now. Tennessee lost by 30 last night at number 8 ranked Florida. So SEC guys, whoo, the SEC is loaded.
Ridiculous.
Women's hoops, get this, you'll love this: 80-73 loss at home to Texas. Texas is ranked number 5. They're 14 and 1. OU fell to 12 and 2 after that loss. There were 54 fouls called in that game. There was a 12-minute video review. I think Eric Bailey said might have been 13 minutes. Women's basketball is broken. Women's basketball is a very tough watch. Women's basketball should not need a transcendent player like Caitlin Clark to come in and say, wow, let's watch women's basketball. You turn on Oklahoma and Texas, and you're just like, this is disgusting. This is a disgusting display of officiating. Now, OU didn't help itself. They had 27 turnovers, which led to 28 points. Yikes. They hit 2 3-pointers in that game, I think. Yikes, right? And then they go on the road in their next game. They go to Tennessee, number 15 ranked Tennessee. UT, SEC game. Where's Orange? You think, uh-oh, here we go again. No. OU gets a 19-point lead early in that game, I guess third quarter. But they had to hold on at the buzzer. They had to hope Tennessee missed an open 3, which Tennessee obliged them. OU wins the game 87-86. Huge win, but guys, stop turning the basketball over. Sooners had 31 turnovers this time. I don't know if I've ever seen a number that bad that wasn't like Eddie Sutton Final Four team against Southern University or something like that, in a non-conference Christmas game or something like that. 31 turnovers is a lot, and that contributed to 30 points by the Vols. Double yikes. But Tennessee missed the game winner. OU advances. Their next 3 games, Sooners' next 3 games are at Mississippi State, at Texas A&M. I'm sorry, at Mississippi State, and then Texas A&M and Missouri in Norman. And none of those 3 teams are ranked. None of them. So you got that going for you, right? That's good, because up next is number 2 ranked South Carolina, just the defending national champ. Doesn't get any easier for the women, Carson. This is a different animal in the SEC.
No, I mean, those turnover numbers are staggering. It is impressive that they lost a game by single digits and beat a top 25 team with that many turnovers.
Oh.
That means if they really put it together, they don't turn it over as much. They really just work on their ball control. This could be one of the best teams in women's college basketball. I had not heard those stats until you just said them, but of course you're going to lose a game where you commit 27 turnovers. How don't you lose a game where you commit 37 turnovers on the road? That's absurd. That's crazy.
Six.
But this team, from what I've heard, is very physical. They're usually good shooters. The two threes against Texas, I know that didn't help. But for how rough the ball control was, if there is any silver lining, that shows that even when we're turning the ball over this much, we can be this good when we're not.
Yeah. 58 turnovers in the 2 games. There were times toward the end of Sherry Cole's last few seasons where they didn't have 58 possessions, right, in a game.
Yeah.
Much less have so many possessions that you can have 58 turnovers and still shoot not great. And
Yeah.
it's amazing. It's amazing. The job that Jenny Baranchik has done and the corner that this team needs to turn now. Anyway, any final thoughts before we wrap this thing up? I'm looking forward to seeing what the Sooners do tonight against Texas A&M. But we got defensive coordinator hiring. We got the roster still shaking out, the transfer portal, news coming in recruiting. I believe we just made a new hire on our staff, so more on that later. But that's what we call a tease. Yeah, wrap it up. Final thoughts, Carson?
Yeah, a lot to be excited about. Football obviously is kind of what the biggest thing that most Sooners fans care about. But that being over, there's still so much stuff. True signing day, getting a new defensive coordinator, all of this portal stuff shaking out. That's a lot of fun. And then you look at baseball and softball starting soon, basketball both enjoying good seasons right now. There's just so much to be looking out for. So hope you guys are staying tuned to us, but I'm having a lot of fun with it.
Yep. Where you're going to want to be is Oklahoma Sooners on SI.com. Easy way to follow that is if you're on the social media, if you're on the Twitters, just follow Sooners on SI at Sooners on SI. That's the corporate account, right? You can also follow me. I put everything up at John E. Hoover. Ryan is going to continue to put up everything as well. _ Ryan Chapman, and then Carson is at Carson D. Field. Don't forget my YouTube channel, John Hoover Media. That's where you're going to find all the interviews, our podcasts, our breakouts, our stand-ups, our raps, all that good stuff. And it's going to be a heck of a January. I know that. It's January 8th right now, right? So we are working already on week 2 of 2025. Here we go, right? Crazy.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Oklahoma Sooners on SI. Keep it there throughout the week. We'll keep you guys updated. For Carson Field, I'm John Hoover. See you guys.